Welcome, this is Jen, the Liberty Lion, and today I want to talk about how the United States existed prior to the Constitution. As a matter of fact, the United States appears to have existed long before the Constitution. So we're at the Library of Congress, and it's December 30th, 1776. In Congress, December 30th, 1776. It appearing to Congress that it will be extremely difficult, if not impracticable, to supply the Army of the United States with bacon, salted beef, and pork, soap, tallow, and candles, unless the exportation thereof be prohibited. So the United States is shown also in the Articles of Confederation, as well as the United States of America. So you have two forms of government. You have the United States in Congress assembled, and you have the United States of America in Congress assembled. And those are in the Articles of Confederation, also before the Constitution was written. And the Constitution, as you know, I've said in the past, is an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, which was something that was shown in the Committee of Detail notes that we can find on the Library of Congress. So here's the Articles of Confederation 1777. After the letter from Congress that we just looked at, where it said the Army of the United States. So in all the documents that I've seen that are from that time period, the 1776 to 1780s, United States was used in almost every situation as meaning the military. And in one congressional record, there was one member, I think this was in 1889, he distinguished a military government between a civil government, the United States being a government for the military, and the states being the United States of America being a government for a civil government. In the Articles of Confederation, we see both of them. And this was the reason why the Constitution needed to be written, which was, as I've said, the amendment to the Articles of Confederation, because it was sort of confusing. And whatever reasons they had, whatever other reasons they had, that it was weak or what have you. But the federal government was weak. Well, in here we have the independent civil government and we have the federal government in the Articles of Confederation. And so they found that they needed to outline or line out the federal portion or the military portion of the government separate, but it was under the United States of America, the free, sovereign, and independent states. And in OLRC, we see that the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, Ordinance of 1787, and the Constitution are organic laws. Being organic laws, meaning that you could say that they are the original laws, but you could also say that they are part of an organ, that they all work together. And if they all work together, they can't be separated out from each other. They're in line. First, you declare your independence. Then you form a League of Nations or League of States. And then you form a military to protect your independence and your league, your league of friendship. So what they did was, after they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation, they simply wanted to outline the military power in a more thorough way. And that's why they amended the Articles of Confederation and created the Constitution. So we see here in the Articles of Confederation, the delegates of the United States of America in Congress assembled. So when the states, the civil government, come together, they come together as free, sovereign, and independent states without their military government. So they do this as free, sovereign, and independent states so that they can do things that they need to do as a civil government. Then they can also assemble as a military force with military power, and those are outlined in the Constitution. So you have delegates of the United States of America in Congress assembled, who are part of the Confederacy, and the Confederacy is the United States of America. So each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. So those states that combine themselves together to call themselves the United States of America are free, sovereign, and independent. And they have every power and jurisdiction and right which is not by this Confederation, the United States of America in Congress assembled, expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. So if I read that to you in very simple layman's terms, what it's saying is, we of the free, sovereign, and independent states forming a civil government retain all our rights and sovereignties and freedoms and independence, and all our power and jurisdiction, which is not delegated to the military government. Okay, so all the states retain their independence, sovereignty, freedom, power, jurisdiction, and right, which they didn't expressly delegate to the United States. Now, that does not mean the United States takes over the entire country whenever it declares war or for any other purpose. What that means is that they formed a military, and there were military powers given to the military government. And those powers are expressly written out in the Constitution. So in the Constitution's preamble, it says, we the people of the military, in order to do all these things for the civilians or the civil government, that they promise to stick to the Constitution. Okay, and what does the Constitution say? That they'll make laws for themselves. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Which means that they're going to keep themselves in check. They're going to make laws for themselves. If we go down to Article 1, Section 8, it says the Congress shall have the power to. Okay, now the United States has the power to make laws for the United States. And where are the United States? That's in 17, which is the seat of government, and the place is purchased for post. And the posts are such things as forts, arsenals, magazines, dockyards, and other needful defensive buildings. And all these things listed under Article 1, Section 8 are the things that they do on the federal lands. There's proof of this. It's in the laws, the first laws written by the federal government, that they will do all these things. And if you look at the officers' manuals, these are the things that officers agree to. They pay taxes, duties, imposts, excise. So taxes is, they pay tax because they live on the federal lands. So just like the president has to live in the White House because the president is commander-in-chief and it's a military post because it's part of the United States and it cannot be abandoned. It cannot be unmanned. It has to be manned all the time. The president has to live there, and that's why he's provided a White House, a house. All officers are provided housing on the military post. Recently, or more recently, there are only required to be a percentage of officers who live on post. And then the rest are allowed to live off post if they choose. And that has more to do with housing and essential personnel. So some military officers are required during emergencies. And so they're essential personnel, and they would probably more likely be living on the military post. Whereas the rest of them can live off the military post, and that allows to free up housing for other people who need it. So when they live on post, back in the old days, back when the Constitution was written, they had to stay on the post. They had to live on the post. They had to ask to work a second job. And the reason why they had to ask to work a second job was because that job was going to be also on the military post. So an officer who lives on the military post, who's expected to always be on the military post because a military post cannot be unmanned or it's easily taken, can work on post on the land that are public lands. The military posts are public lands. So if they wanted to do farming or ranching or cut down the trees and build furniture or what have you to supplement their income, they could do so, but they had to pay a tax because they were using the public lands for profit, for personal gain. So they had to pay a tax. So it doesn't say the Congress will collect taxes on the salaries of all officers. It says the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. It means that it could choose. Duties, imposts, and excise. So some of this means that when an officer brings property onto the post, it can be taxed. And when he takes property off the post, it can also be taxed. Okay, and so they want to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, of the military. Okay, because during the Revolutionary War, the military acquired debt because they had to purchase weapons for the militia. The militia were comprised of private citizens. There were some conversations written down in the records of the Continental Congress, and those records showed that it was mostly businessmen who were contributing to the war effort. And those businessmen were delegates to the United States in Congress assembled, or representatives, if you will. They were complaining that the militia wasn't showing up. And then some of the conversation that took place was that how can you expect people to show up to fight a war when they are young, like 16, they are without weapons, and America didn't have any weapons to give to them. They didn't have shoes. They were, the 16-year-olds were the men left at home to help the family, help the moms and the children, and work the farms. So they were faced, the mothers were faced with giving up their last sons to go fight in a war when she needed him at home to help with the duties at home, such as the farming. The boy doesn't have shoes. He doesn't have a weapon. He's not going to leave his family to go fight. And so some of these representatives from some of the states were complaining about this, that they weren't showing up. And then the other side was saying, well, how can you expect them to? They have no guns and we have no guns to give them. They have no shoes and we have no shoes to give them. And so these businessmen were trying to figure out how to provide these people, not just the 16-year-olds, but all of them, the militia in general, how to provide for them so that they can show up and fight a war. Otherwise, they're showing up and they're just going to get killed. And so they're showing up to get killed. They're not showing up to win their freedom. So one of the things they had to do was they had to start finding ways to import things for these people. And as we saw in, in Congress, it says that it appearing to Congress that it will be extremely difficult, if not impracticable, to supply the Army of the United States with bacon, salted beef, pork, soap, tallow, and candles, unless the exportation thereof be prohibited. So things were getting exported, and they didn't have it to keep there to give to the military because people were exporting it to be sent away so that they could make money. And so they didn't have it there to help them with, to win the war. Okay, I'd like to talk about, real quick, just because I found this recently, arts, the science and arts, useful arts. I just want to say here that we know that there were 7, 8, or 9, I can't remember the number, Freemasons that signed the Constitution. And the Freemasons had an arts and science program that they used as part of their education and the education of their children. And there were, I think, 7 topics or 7 headings. And they called them the useful arts and sciences, which included like rhetoric and mathematics and things of that nature. So that may be what that means in here when it talks about the progress of science and useful arts. So this was for the military, and education for the military, basically. It definitely was not for grants to take money from the private citizens as a tax or whatever so that they could grant money to their favorites. It definitely was not intended to be that. And then where do these things take place? Well, they take place on the federal lands. The federal lands that are called by the committee that was put together by Eisenhower, islands in the states. And this goes to jurisdiction. So jurisdiction is exclusive legislative jurisdiction. So exclusive legislative jurisdiction means it has exclusive jurisdiction or exclusive power or power without the states over the seat of government, which is Washington, D.C. And like authority over places purchased, and the places purchased are for defense. As we see here, forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. And the posts are the federal lands. Okay, so we have a United States, which is a military government or a government for the military that works for the United States of America. And then we have this document here, which shows that the United States as a military force existed back in 1776. But in order to have a United States, you have to have first states. So Trump had signed an executive order, and I believe that there was one signed previously to that years and years back that said that they were going to teach in the schools that the United States existed before the states. And it can't be that way. There has to be states before there are United States. But in a way, it's still correct, because once the states joined the Union, first they were nations and then they joined the Union. And in their relationship with the Union, they are states. So they're states and they're also nations. When the government talks about states, it's talking about its relationship with that nation. It's with its relationship within the context of the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation. So when we're talking about the powers of the Constitution and the powers of the states, we're talking about a state and its relationship to the federal government. So it's a state for some purposes, and it's a nation for some purposes. So when it joined in a firm league of friendship, even in the Articles of Confederation, because it originally included, and still includes by way of amendment, the federal military, they became states. Just like in Europe, as far as their relationship with the European Union, they're considered states. But for all other purposes, not in that relationship, not in the European Union, they're nations because they're free and sovereign. So in this system of government, as far as our military goes, we are states. As far as our sovereignty goes and our civil government goes, we are a nation. Each state is a nation. Each state has its own independence. So it may be true that a state cannot secede from the Union, but a nation should be able to secede from the Union. Because once you secede from the Union, you're no longer part of the Union to be considered a state. You're now a nation. But being a nation, you have to have your own military. Otherwise, you cannot protect your constitution, your people, your land, your resources. You can easily be overtaken. So to be a nation, you have to have a military. And so as far as the nations all combining together as states, they are still free, sovereign, and independent. But as far as their military force goes and their relationship to the military and the military relationship to them, they're considered states. So this is why we have a United States of America in Congress assembled, as well, and at the same time, but for different purposes, we have the United States in Congress assembled. Okay, so the Constitution did not create the United States. The United States of America had a military and that military was called United States. Consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, and leave a comment in the comment section. I appreciate hearing from all of you, no matter what your opinion or emotion is about the context of this video. And I will see you guys maybe tomorrow.